The German air traffic controller's voice was a ragged edge of static and fear, barking warnings that few pilots wanted to hear. Achtung! Juggernauts at 30,000 feet! They have broken the formation. It was January 1944, and the winter sky over Hanover was a churning metallic gray, a perfect canvas for slaughter. The bomber stream, lumbering B-17s, had just been savaged by a vicious, concentrated attack of Me-109s and FW-190s. But now, the tables were turning, and the fear wasn't about the bombers anymore. It was about the escort. High above, a lone P-47 Thunderbolt, scarred and sputtering from a close pass, broke from the sun and dove like a hammer forged in hell. This Thunderbolt wasn't just any American fighter. It belonged to Major Francis Gabreski, the man the Luftwaffe were already beginning to call the Slovak Fury, a nod to his ancestry and his utterly relentless style of attack. Gabreski didn't bother with the textbook maneuvers. He relied on sheer speed, the massive durability of his jug, and a primal, almost frightening instinct for where the enemy would be a second before they knew it themselves. He was separated from Zemke's Wolfpack, alone against what his internal clock told him was at least 7 German fighters attempting to reform for another pass on the retreating flying fortresses. The tension in the cockpit was so thick Gabreski could practically taste the ozone in cordite. His oxygen mask fogged slightly with each shallow, rapid breath. He toggled the gun sight, adjusting the lead just slightly ahead of the fastest 109 attempting to climb away. Unlike many American pilots who prioritized a clean burst, Gabreski didn't mind emptying his 8.50 caliber machine guns into a single target if it meant guaranteeing the kill. His finger tightened on the trigger, a steady, unhurried pressure that belied the chaos outside his canopy. The resulting chatter of the guns was deafening, a roaring sound that shook the massive aircraft. Tracer rounds stitched a deadly line across the 109's fuselage and into the engine cowling. A sheet of white steam, followed instantly by crimson flame, erupted from the enemy fighter. Gabreski didn't waste time watching it fall. He banked hard, using the massive momentum of the dive, checking his 6 o'clock position with rapid, frantic glances. A second 109 flashed past, its pilot clearly shocked by the ferocity and suddenness of the attack, firing wildly and missing wide. This was the untold aspect of Gabreski's genius. He wasn't just a great shot. He was a psychological terror. He used the P-47's immense size and resilience not as defensive attributes, but as offensive weapons, betting his life that the average German pilot, already demoralized by the relentless U.S. bombardment, would flinch before he did. This single pilot engagement, deep inside enemy territory, defined why the Luftwaffe command staff was starting to issue specific, panicked directives about the American ace of aces, a man whose combat career began with such profound clumsiness that nobody, least of all Gabreski himself, ever expected him to survive the first 6 missions, let alone become the deadliest fighting pilot the European theater of operations would ever produce. Francis Stanley Stanleyski's path to becoming the most lethal American pilot in the European theater was anything but predestined. It was a rough, grinding metamorphosis, forged in failure and cultural duality. Born in the coal mining regions of Pennsylvania, The son of Polish immigrants, Gabreski felt perpetually caught between two worlds, the disciplined, traditional world of his parents and the brash, expanding promise of 1930s America. This duality would later translate perfectly into the air, a ruthless, calculated approach inherited from the Polish warrior tradition, combined with the aggressive, individualistic daring of the American fighter pilot. His early flying career was, frankly, abysmal. At the University of Notre Dame, he struggled academically, and his initial entry into the Army Air Corps Reserve was marked by clumsy landings, poor navigation skills, and a fundamental misunderstanding of aerial tactics. His instructors often questioned his ability to ever command a complex aircraft. He scraped by training, earning his wings in 1940, and was immediately assigned to a basic fighter squadron. When America entered the war, Gabreski, driven by an almost spiritual connection to his heritage, badgered his commanding officers for a transfer to where the real fighting was, Britain. But he didn't want just any assignment. He wanted to fly with the Royal Air Force, specifically seeking out the legendary Polish squadrons who had been fighting Hitler since 1939. This decision was critical. The American doctrine, while advanced, was still largely theoretical, steeped in bomber defense. The Polish pilots, seasoned veterans of the Battle of Britain and relentless fighters, taught him the brutal, practical reality of aerial combat. He spent 5 months as a liaison officer with the RAF's 315 Polish Squadron, flying Spitfires. He observed their tactics, the aggressive head-on passes, the instantaneous decisions, and the absolute lack of hesitation when facing superior numbers. He learned the value of the gaggle, the disciplined, tight formation fighting that maximized their numbers. Most importantly, he absorbed their philosophy. When you enter a fight, you do not just survive, you destroy. Their motto was simple: nihil de nihilo, nothing comes from nothing. The swaggering American rookie quickly shed his peacetime habits, realizing that every second in the air was a life-or-death calculation. He learned the subtle art of situational awareness that became his hallmark. By the time he transferred back to the U.S. 8th Air Force in February 1943, joining Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke's 56th Fighter Group, Gabreski was no longer the clumsy student. He was a sharpened blade, ready to put the lessons learned from the hardened Polish veterans into practice. But he would do it using the powerful, controversial machine that was the P-47 Thunderbolt. The 56th Fighter Group, stationed at Halesworth in England, was known as Zemke Wolfpack, and they were tasked with making the P-47 Thunderbolt, or the Jug, as it was affectionately, or sometimes derisively, called, work. The Thunderbolt was a controversial monster. It was huge, heavy, and critics argued it lacked the maneuverability of the Spitfire or the soon-to-arrive P-51 Mustang. Early missions proved frustrating. American fighter pilots struggled to engage the agile German fighters effectively. Many commanders doubted the efficacy of the P-47 as a high-altitude escort. But Gabreski saw potential where others saw limitations. He realized that the P-47's immense weight was its secret weapon. Its Pratt & Whitney double-wasp engine delivered colossal power, allowing it to maintain energy at extreme altitudes, and its diving speed was unmatched. Gabreski adopted and refined the pure zoom and boom tactic. He would use the sun for cover, climb high above the German formations, often pushing the limits of the P-47 ceiling, and dive vertically, achieving speeds few other contemporary aircraft could match. The German pilots focused on the B-17s below them would rarely see the attack coming until the roar of the diving Jug was already upon them. The core of the tactic was simplicity and brutality. Never turn and dogfight. Trade altitude for speed. Strike fast and use the incredible structural integrity of the P-47 to soak up any return fire during the breakaway. Gabreski spent hours studying the weaknesses of the Me-109 and the FW-190, focusing on their propensity to turn tightly but lose energy rapidly in a sustained fight. His first kills were hard-won, often requiring multiple passes due to the steep dive angles. He scored his first official victory in August 1943, downing a Me-109 over Dreux, France. The victory was less a graceful dance and more a violent collision of wills. This confirmed his philosophy. Precision was secondary to persistence and overwhelming force. As his score began to climb, Gabreski didn't just teach the tactics to his flight. He drilled a mindset into them, a ferocious confidence that bordered on arrogance. He taught them to never initiate a turn fight below 18,000 feet, to always maintain the element of surprise, and, crucially, to rely completely on the collective protection of the formation. The 56th Fighter Group's kill ratio began to soar, turning the P-47 from a questioned heavyweight into the definitive high-altitude fighter, a transformation driven almost single-handedly by Gabreski's relentless aggression and tactical brilliance. As 1943 bled into 1944, Gabreski's tally wasn't just increasing, it was exploding. He transformed from a successful pilot into a true ace, a term that carries an immense psychological weight, both for the side he fought for and the enemy he faced. His score surged past 10, then 15, reaching 20 before the spring thaws. His skill was not merely in pulling the trigger, but in his calculated aggression and uncanny ability to anticipate the enemy's reaction under stress. He saw the fight 3 dimensions ahead. When a German pilot, attempting to escape a pass, broke right, Gabreski was already adjusting his energy profile to intercept him on the subsequent left turn. He realized that fear introduced predictability into the German cockpit, and he ruthlessly exploited that vulnerability. He meticulously logged every piece of intelligence gathered during missions, creating a detailed mental map of German air strategy, focusing on their preferred escape routes and defensive maneuvers. This tactical awareness allowed him to consistently position himself not just for the kill, but for the optimal position after the kill, ensuring his survival. The psychological warfare element of his success cannot be overstated. By early 1944, the appearance of the checkered nose of the 56th Fighter Group and Gabreski's distinctive white-outlined aircraft began to instill a palpable dread among the German pilots of JG-26 and JG-2. Intercepted German communications detailed specific warnings about the heavy, high-flying Americans. The Luftwaffe commanders, recognizing the devastating effect Gabreski and his wingmen were having on morale and operational capability, began prioritizing the avoidance of the P-47 groups. If they saw the high-altitude formations of the 56th, the directive was often to break off engagement and search for less aggressive American groups. Gabreski had effectively created a localized air superiority bubble simply through reputation. His kills were not just numerical losses for the Luftwaffe. They represented the shattering of pilot morale, the erosion of their confidence in their own equipment, and the failure of their defensive strategy. He became the physical embodiment of the overwhelming industrial power of the Allies, demonstrating that American ingenuity and firepower, when combined with calculated ferocity, were insurmountable. For the Luftwaffe, they were facing not just a skilled opponent, but a force of nature that operated outside the conventional boundaries of dogfighting, a fact that cemented Gabreski's status as a living legend among his peers and a ghost in the nightmares of his enemies. He wasn't aiming for the wings or the tail. He was aiming straight for the cockpit, aiming to end the conflict in the fastest, most decisive way possible. By mid-spring 1944, Gabreski's personal score had surpassed 20, and he was promoted to Major, taking command of the 61st Fighter Squadron within the 56th Fighter Group. The burden of leadership, especially in combat, is a profound and often unspoken weight, exponentially heavier than the weight of the P-47 he piloted. Gabreski was no longer just responsible for his own survival and his own kill count. He was now responsible for 24 young men flying into skies thick with flak and determined enemies. Every decision he made, the altitude of the attack, the route back over the continent, the choice of targets, carried the agonizing immediate cost of human life. This period marked a subtle but profound shift in his character. The aggressive, sometimes reckless pursuit of the kill had to be tempered by strategic responsibility. Yet the pressure to perform as the ace remained, a paradoxical demand that required him to constantly lead by example, pushing the limits of combat while simultaneously maintaining the disciplined caution necessary for successful command. He became withdrawn, often spending hours alone reviewing mission footage and maps. The constant cycle of exhilaration after a victory, followed instantly by the gut-wrenching grief over a lost wingman, chipped away at his composure. Pilots looked to him for courage, for answers, for the almost mystical ability to predict danger, and this expectation isolated him. How do you lead men to their deaths day after day while still maintaining the fierce, almost joyful aggression needed to succeed? It's a psychological tightrope walk. His superiors, too, leaned on him heavily, not just for kills, but for the massive propaganda value his success generated back home. He was the face of American air superiority, the tireless Polish-American who brought the fight to Hitler. He represented proof that the U.S. could produce pilots who were not just technically proficient, but profoundly effective killers. But this fame was a double-edged sword. It made him a target, forcing him to be even more vigilant. The Luftwaffe dedicated special fighter patrols, sometimes referred to as Experten traps, solely aimed at eliminating the known American aces, and Gabreski was at the top of that list. The immense pressure of being the standard-bearer, the one who must never fail, was a constant companion in his high-altitude cockpit. He had to embody invincibility so his men would believe in it, even as he privately calculated the ever-decreasing odds of his own survival. This leads to a critical question of wartime command. In a conflict where propaganda demands an unbeatable hero, does the pressure of setting an untouchable standard, even if it saves lives by terrifying the enemy, truly justify the emotional and psychological sacrifice required of the leader? When do the needs of the narrative crush the man piloting the plane? Share your thoughts below on the impossible burden faced by these leading aces. As the spring turned to a critical summer, the pace of the air war escalated dramatically in preparation for Operation Overlord. D-Day arrived, and Gabreski's focus broadened from purely high-altitude escort to intense, low-level ground attack, a punishing and brutally dangerous facet of air combat that the P-47, with its rugged construction, excelled at. However, his primary objective remained the destruction of the Luftwaffe's shrinking resources. He flew relentlessly, often twice a day, pushing his own limits and the maintenance crews to exhaustion. The focus was now firmly on destroying German air power wherever it could be found, whether in the sky or hiding on the ground. The pressure was compounded by the knowledge that he was rapidly closing in on the coveted record set by the legendary World War I ace, Eddie Rickenbacker, who had achieved 26 aerial victories. For the 8th Air Force, surpassing Rickenbacker was not just a historical footnote. It was a profound symbol of America's industrial and military might in the modern conflict. Gabreski felt the weight of this impending achievement. Every sortie now carried the burden of potential history. He didn't chase the record for ego. He chased it because every German plane he destroyed increased the lifespan of his bomber crews and the security of his wingmen. On June 27, 1944, Gabreski scored his 26th victory, matching Rickenbacker's total. He was now officially tied for the American title. The base erupted in subdued celebration. Subdued because they knew the job was not finished, and the next flight would be the most scrutinized of his career. The media coverage became intense, featuring Gabreski as the calm Polish-American farm boy turned scourge of the Nazi skies. This period of extreme dominance was marked by a relentless, almost mechanical efficiency. Gabreski rarely engaged in flashy maneuvering. His kills were always achieved through positioning, speed, and overwhelming bursts of fire. He had perfected the art of the quick, devastating strike, ensuring he spent the absolute minimum time in the vulnerable space of the dogfight. While other U.S. groups were transitioning heavily to the P-51 Mustang, the 56th retained its dedication to the P-47, valuing its toughness and diving speed. Gabreski, despite his achievements, insisted he was still learning, still improving his technique, driven by the realization that in air combat, stagnation meant death. He was poised on the precipice of history, needing just one more victory to secure the title of America's deadliest ace in Europe, a record that felt destined for his determined hands. The 27th victory, the one that would officially crown Gabreski the new American ace of aces in the European theater, was a moment of intense symbolic gravity. It came just 10 days after he tied the record. On July 5, 1944, leading a squadron sweep near Évreux, Gabreski spotted a formation of FW-190s attempting to hide in the cloud cover below. The engagement was swift and utterly brutal. Gabreski executed his trademark high-speed scissors, forcing an unsuspecting Focke-Wulf pilot into a sudden high-G turn that bled the enemy aircraft's energy instantly. Gabreski followed the German down, his P-47 thundering through the cloud layers. When they broke clear, the German was attempting a desperate low-altitude escape. Gabreski gave him no quarter, adjusting his aim slightly upward to compensate for the distance and the enemy's speed. The 8.50 caliber machine guns hammered away, consuming ammunition at a devastating rate. The stream of tracers impacted the FW-190 just behind the cockpit, causing the pilot to instantly lose control. The aircraft corkscrewed violently into the French landscape. 27 confirmed kills. The flight back to Halesworth was one of silent, profound relief. This wasn't just a number. It represented the culmination of years of struggle, the validation of the P-47, and a massive morale boost for the entirety of the 8th Air Force. When he landed, the entire base mobilized. Maintenance crews, fellow pilots, and officers rushed the taxiway. Gabreski, however, climbed out of the cockpit not with a triumphant roar, but with a quiet, almost haunted look on his face. The celebration around him felt distant. He understood the profound paradox of his position. Every victory brought immense fame and recognition, but it also cemented the fact that he was surviving missions that were claiming the lives of his friends and subordinates. The achievement felt less like a triumph and more like a heavy golden anchor. He was now the target the Luftwaffe desperately wanted to eliminate, the symbol they had to break. His record-breaking achievement made him the most famous fighter pilot of the war, a distinction that made continued combat flying exponentially more dangerous. The contrast between the adrenaline high of breaking the barrier and the quiet, heavy realization that he was now expected to survive the unsurvivable defined the rest of his short time in the skies over Germany. The legend was cemented. Now came the terrifying task of trying to live up to it. With the record secured, the wheels of the propaganda machine turned immediately. High Command, valuing Gabreski as an invaluable symbol of American dominance, began making immediate arrangements to pull him out of combat. The argument was simple and logical. He had accomplished his mission. He had broken the record, and his continued exposure was an unnecessary risk. Losing the ETO's highest-scoring ace, especially after such a massive morale victory, would be a catastrophic blow to Allied confidence. Gabreski resisted vehemently. He understood the logic, but he argued two crucial points. First, his men were still fighting. Pulling the commander out of the line while the war raged felt like a betrayal of the deepest trust between leader and subordinate. He felt his duty bound him to the cockpit until the 56th was rotated home. Second, he recognized the psychological effect his continuous presence had on the German pilots. He was a known entity, a source of fear. His sudden disappearance from the skies would signal to the Luftwaffe that the Americans were now playing defensively, potentially boosting German morale at a critical juncture in the ground war. He believed his greatest value was still in the air, maintaining the psychological pressure. Gabreski eventually negotiated a compromise. He would fly just 5 more missions before rotating back to the States for a mandatory leave and promotional tour. This decision, born of duty and perhaps a growing sense of combat fatalism, proved pivotal. With his rotation date looming, a subtle recklessness began to creep into his flying. The immense pressure that had driven him to meticulous planning now seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of urgency. He pushed the limits, flying lower, closer to flak positions, trying to maximize every remaining hour in combat. He knew the risk was astronomical, yet he embraced it, perhaps believing that after 27 victories and countless close calls, he possessed an invisible shield. His near misses became more frequent. One mission saw him return with large holes punched through his fuselage from a flak battery he had approached too casually. Another required him to fight his way out of an ambush by a pair of Me-262 jet fighters, a terrifying engagement from which he barely escaped thanks to the superior diving speed of his P-47. He was pushing fate, determined to extract every possible toll on the enemy before the inevitable rotation to the safety of the rear, a safety he increasingly distrusted. The morning of July 20th, 1944, dawned clear and unseasonably warm, a perfect day for flying, and ominously, Gabreski's final scheduled combat mission. He was due to return to the United States the very next day. The 56th Fighter Group was tasked with a fighter sweep deep into Germany, hunting for anything the retreating Luftwaffe had left operating. The mission was relatively uneventful, consisting mostly of routine escort until the order came down for a low-level strafing run, a train-busting exercise designed to disrupt German logistical movements. Gabreski, leading the 61st Squadron, was flying exceptionally low, buzzing treetops and power lines, the exhilaration of the final ride mixed with the intense focus required at such high speed near the ground. They spotted a small airfield near Oschersleben, littered with parked German aircraft, seemingly abandoned or disabled. It was a tempting target, a final opportunity to add to the monumental tally and deliver one last punch to the enemy. Despite the fact that low-level airfield strafing was inherently one of the most dangerous missions due to unexpected flak and ground fire, Gabreski ordered the attack. The squadron peeled off and roared across the field, their guns blazing, ripping apart several parked Junkers and Heinkels. The dust and smoke from the ground explosions obscured the field, making subsequent passes hazardous. As Gabreski completed his run and pulled up to assess the damage, he noticed a lone, seemingly intact Heinkel 111 bomber positioned near the perimeter of a hangar. It was an irresistible target, one he instinctively felt he could not leave operational. This was the fatal moment, the final fractional lapse in judgment brought on by months of relentless pressure and the dangerous belief in his own invincibility. He dropped his P-47 back down, accelerating for a final high-speed pass. He banked sharply, lining up the Heinkel, his guns spitting fire into the fuselage. But the speed was too high, the target too close to the ground, and the dust and smoke from the ground explosions had completely obscured the contour of the terrain. In the confusion, Gabreski misjudged his pull-out clearance by mere feet. He fired a devastating burst, ensuring the Heinkel was destroyed, but as he yanked the control column back, the massive propeller blades of his Thunderbolt clipped the soft, uneven German soil. The shudder was instantaneous and violent, a sickening impact that momentarily stalled the engine and violently wrenched the control column from his grasp. The propeller was bent and twisted, the engine mounts severely damaged. The once unstoppable Jug lost power and began to wobble dangerously, settling into an uncontrolled, rapid glide toward the ground. Gabreski instinctively knew the combat was over. He had survived 27 kills in the sky, only to be defeated by a pile of dirt on the ground. The crash was not spectacular, it was simply fatalistic. The heavy P-47, unable to maintain flight on the damaged engine, pancaked gently into a small grove of trees and came to a crumpled stop, deep inside enemy territory. Gabreski, dazed but miraculously uninjured beyond a severe concussion, quickly scrambled out of the ruined cockpit, discarding his maps and equipment. He ran, attempting to reach the safety of the nearby woods, but his attempt at evasion was brief. German soldiers, alerted by the low-flying attack, quickly converged on the crash site. Major Francis Gabreski, America's deadliest ace in the ETO, was captured without firing a shot on the ground. The irony was devastating. He had survived the toughest aerial opponents, evaded flak traps designed to kill him, and mastered one of the war's most punishing aircraft, only to be brought down by a tactical error during a non-essential ground attack mission just hours before his scheduled flight home. He spent the remainder of the war, nearly 10 months, as a prisoner of war at Luftwaffe in Barth, Germany, a high-security camp for captured Allied airmen. His fellow prisoners were stunned. The news of the Slovak Fury being brought down spread through the prison camps quickly, a symbol that even the untouchable could fall. For the Luftwaffe, the news of his capture was a massive, though short-lived, morale boost. They had not defeated him in the air, but they had finally neutralized their most feared opponent. The capture itself, however, did not diminish his legend. When the war ended and Gabreski was repatriated, his service record stood testament to his relentless dedication. While other aces would later surpass his total score across multiple theaters, like McCampbell in the Pacific, Gabreski remained the dominant P-47 ace and the undisputed king of the European sky in the crucial period leading up to D-Day. His career did not end there. Gabreski went on to fly again, proving that the fire of the fighter pilot cannot easily be extinguished. He later flew in the Korean War, transitioning to the F-86 Sabre jet and becoming one of only 7 American pilots to achieve ace status in both World War II and the Korean conflict, ultimately reaching a confirmed total of 34.5 kills. His legacy is not just the number 28, it is the philosophical shift he imposed on the entire 8th Air Force. Air combat is not about elegant dogfights, but about brutal, high-speed energy management and utter dominance. His story is a permanent chapter in the history of air superiority, defined by the aggressive heart he carried into the cockpit of the mighty Thunderbolt, a legend that taught the Luftwaffe the true meaning of fear at 30,000 feet. The irony of his final flight only serves to underscore the unpredictable, unforgiving nature of combat, where even the greatest heroes are perpetually one fractional mistake away from disaster. The man who conquered the German sky was finally brought down by the earth itself. If this intense story of aerial mastery and devastating sacrifice touched your heart, and if you want to uncover more gripping details about the legendary machines and heroic pilots that defined the greatest air war in history, please subscribe to WWII Lore and join our mission to keep these essential tales alive. We'll see you in the next briefing.